Good morning, everybody. What is the color of your skin? And why is your skin in that particular color? Think. The best example of human genetic adaptation to climate is your skin color, which likely evolved as an adaptation to ultraviolet radiation. Humans exhibit a number of biological adaptations to the great variety of environment they occupy. The living organisms react with their environments and they bear full impression of the environment in which they grow. In order to withstand adverse conditions of the environment and utilize to their maximum benefit the nutrients and other conditions prevailing therein, the organisms develop certain morphological, anatomical, physiological and reproductive features. Any feature of an organism or its part which enables it to exist under conditions of its habitat is called adaptation. Every organism develops certain adaptations and so does the population or a community. The completion of life cycle of an organism or stabilization of a community results through a series of adaptations which have survival value. Children, in today's class, we will be learning about ecological adaptations from the unit Principles of Ecology. If we have to have a quick recap of what we learned in the last class, it was about the biotic factors. We had positive interactions, negative interactions, and then interspecific interactions. In negative, we learnt about predation, parasitism, competition, amensalism. And in positive reaction, we learnt about mutualism and commensalism. Under interspecific reactions, we learnt mimicry, myrmecophily and co-evolution. Okay, so we will start with ecological adaptations in today's class. And remember, what is ecology? It is the relation of living organisms to one another and to their physical surroundings. And then we understand that adaptations is the modification in the structure of organisms to survive successfully in an environment. Modification in the structure of an organism to survive successfully in an environment. And then we need to understand that can be classified based on their habitats and their corresponding adaptations. They are classified into hydrophytes, xerophytes, mesophytes, epiphytes and halophytes. Among them, we will start with hydrophytes. What are hydrophytes? Hydrophytes are plants which are living in water or wet places. Okay. In hydrophytes, in relation of the plant to water and air, according to the relationship of the plant to water and air, we subdivide them into free floating hydrophytes, rooted floating hydrophytes, submerged floating hydrophytes, and then rooted submerged hydrophytes. Finally, we will learn about amphibious hydrophytes. So we will start with free floating hydrophytes. Floating hydrophytes. These plants, they float freely on the surface of the water. They are in contact with water and the air, but they do not have contact with the soil. Yes, they do not have contact with the soil. So examples for these type of plants, hydrophytes, are Eichhornia, Pistia. Then we have Wolffia, Salvinia, yes, and Lemna. Type subdivision in hydrophytes is the rooted floating hydrophyte. In this, the root of the plant is fixed in the mud, but their leaves and flowers are floating on the surface of water. So these plants are in contact with the soil, with the water, and with the air. Some examples for rooted floating hydrophyte are Nymphea and Marsilia. Subdivision in hydrophytes is the submerged floating hydrophytes. Here the plants are completely submerged in water and not in contact with soil and air. They are completely submerged in water and they are not in contact with the soil and air. So few examples for that are Utricularia and then Ceratophyllum. We are examples for floating submerged hydrophytes. Tell me, what is the fourth subdivision in hydrophytes? Yes, it is rooted submerged hydrophytes. Okay, so what do we understand by this? The plant is completely submerged in water and rooted in the soil. It's completely submerged in water and it is rooted in the soil, but it is not in contact with the air. Okay, so we call them as rooted submerged hydrophytes. And example for these type of hydrophytes are Hydrilla and Vallisneria. Hydrilla and Vallisneria. Now move on to the fifth division in hydrophytes, which is amphibious hydrophytes. Amphibious hydrophytes are also called as root emergent hydrophytes. And how are they? They are aquatic as well as terrestrial, and they can grow in shallow water or muddy soil, mainly observed in marshy area. And the shoot it is exposed to air, but the root is completely buried in the soil. Few examples for amphibious hydrophytes are Cypress, Sagittaria and Typha. What are hygrophytes? Hygrophytes are plants which can grow in moist, damp and shady places. So, bryophytes and orchids are examples for hygrophytes. Now, adaptations of hydrophytes. There are three types of adaptations: morphological adaptations, anatomical adaptations and physiological adaptations. We first talk about the morphological adaptations in the roots of hydrophytes. Okay, so the roots are poorly developed or absent in certain plants like Wolffia, Ceratophyllum. Okay, the root hairs are present in certain plants. The root caps are replaced by root pockets in plants such as Eichhornia and Pistia. The roots act as a balancing and an anchoring organ. Aerial roots are developed in certain plants also. Then about the morphological adaptation in stems. The stems are long, slender and thin. It is green in color, so it is able to carry out photosynthesis. In some floating forms, stem is spongy. An example for that is Eichhornia. Stem helps in the reproduction by stolons and offsets. Okay, then we have leaves. What type of adaptation is found in hydrophytes? Leaves of the hydrophytes. Many of the floating forms, the leaves are deposited with wax. Nymphia is an example for that. Then in submerged forms they are reduced and thin. In emergent hydrophytes, leaves are of two types. Dissected leaves in water and aerial leaves are well developed. So we call these as heterophily. Heterophily means submerged leaves are dissected and the aerial leaves are entire. Examples are Heterophylla and Sagittaria. Then we have spongy petiole is observed in Acornia, which helps in the buoyancy. The leaves are in Ceratophyllum, the leaves are dissected. So now we will move on to anatomical adaptations. Look at the picture carefully. Okay, the cuticle is either completely absent or it is poorly developed. What is cuticle? It is a waxy water repellent substance that is found on the hydrophytes. Then we have single layer of epidermis. As you see the green portion in the picture. Okay, single layer. Epidermis is the outer layer of the tissue in a plant. Then the cortex, outer layer of tissue, which is immediately before the epidermis. Okay, the cortex, what do we learn? It is well developed with parenchyma. Then the vascular tissues. Vascular tissues are poorly developed, but in some emergent forms, the vascular elements are well developed. We then have mechanical tissues which are generally absent except for some emergent forms. Okay. Now, physiological adaptations of hydrophytes. Ability to withstand anaerobic conditions. What is anaerobic? Aerobic with oxygen. Anaerobic is without oxygen. A process, so they can withstand without oxygen. And they also possess special aerating organs. Aerating means a process by which air is dissolved in a liquids. So they have aerating organs. So children, we have been learning about hydrophytes, the 5 subdivisions in hydrophytes and their adaptations, morphological, anatomical and physiological adaptations. Did you notice the difference between hydrophytes and hygrophytes? Yes, hydrophytes, like lilies, they are permanently immersed in water. But hygrophytes are moisture loving plants and it is just they require frequent and lots of water. So we will move on to xerophytes. Xerophytes are plants which are living in dry or xeric conditions. So they are known as xerophytes. Okay, so there are 2 different types in xerophytes. The first one is physical dryness. What do you mean by physical dryness? In these habitats, soil has a little amount of water due to the inability of the soil to hold water. Which is because of low rainfall. These habitats have low rainfall. The other type is the physiological dryness. In these habitats, water is sufficiently present, but the plants are unable to observe it. Why are they unable to observe it? Because of the absence of capillary spaces. Examples for this is what you studied previously, plants in salty and acidic soil. So, based on adaptive characters, xerophytes are classified into 3 categories. Okay, they are ephemerals, succulents and non-succulents. Okay, first when we talk about ephemerals, okay, they are also called as drought escapers or drought evaders, and they complete their life cycle in a short period of time. An example for that could be Argemon molugo. Okay, then the next type of xerophyte is succulents. Succulents are also called as enduring plants, and these plants store water in their parts during the dry period, and the plants develop adaptive characters to resist extreme drought conditions. Examples is Bryophyllum and Aloe. Okay, the third one is the non-succulents. These are also called as drought resistant plants, or they are also called true xerophytes because they face both external and internal dryness, and they have many adaptations to resist dry conditions. Examples for this is Casuarina, Nerium, Acacia. Okay, now about the morphological adaptations in xerophytes. First we will talk about the root. The root stem is well developed and it is greater than that of the shoot stem. Okay, the root hairs and the root caps are also well developed, and xerophytic plants with the leaves and stem are covered with hairs, and that hair is called as trichophilous plants. Plants which have hair covered on them are called as trichophilous plants. Okay, then the second morphological adaptation is in the stem. The stems are hard and woody. Okay, stems and leaves are covered with wax coating and then sometimes they are covered with dense hairs. So in some xerophytes, the internodes in the stems are modified into fleshy leaf structure called phylloclades. They are called as phylloclades. In some other single or occasionally two internodes are modified into fleshy green structure which is called as cladode, as we see in asparagus, right? Okay, then we will learn about the adaptation in leaves. Leaves are generally, they are leathery and shiny to reflect the light and heat. And then in some plants like Euphorbia, Acacia, the stipules are modified into spines, and the entire leaves are modified into spines, or they are reduced to scales sometimes. Then it is about the anatomical adaptations in xerophytes. So, presence of multi-layered epidermis with a heavy cuticle is to prevent water loss due to transpiration. Water loss due to transpiration is prevented by the multi-layered epidermis. Then we have hypodermis, which is well developed with sclerenchymatous tissues. Okay, then sunken shaped stomata are present only in the lower epidermis with hairs in the sunken pits. Vascular bundles. Vascular bundles are well developed with several layered bundle sheath in xerophytes. Succulents. Some succulents, they possess water storage region also. Then finally about the physiological adaptations in xerophytes. Most of the physiological processes are designed to reduce transpiration, and the life cycle is completed within a short period, like as we saw in ephemerals. After learning about hydrophytes and xerophytes, we move on to mesophytes. Mesophytes are plants which are living in moderate conditions. It is neither too wet nor too dry, and these kind of plants are known as mesophytes. Okay, so the common land plants like hibiscus and maize are called as are examples for mesophytes. When you talk about the morphological adaptations of mesophytes, the root stem is well developed, okay, with the root caps and the root hairs, and then the stems are generally aerial, okay, and they are stout and highly branched, and the leaves are generally large, broad, thin with different shapes. When we talk about the anatomical adaptations, the cuticle in aerial parts are moderately developed and the epidermis is well developed, and stomata are generally present on both the epidermis. Mesophyll is well differentiated and the vascular and mechanical tissues are also fairly developed and well differentiated. Then the physiological adaptations. Physiological processes. All the physiological processes are normal. Temporary wilting takes place at room temperature when there is water scarcity. Okay, so this is about the mesophytes. You know what are tropophytes? These are plants which behave like xerophytes at summer, and they behave as mesophytes or hydrophytes during the rainy season. So children, in today's class, we learnt ecological adaptations. Under that, we completed hydrophytes, xerophytes and mesophytes. In the next class, we will learn about epiphytes and halophytes. Children, go through the textbook pages carefully, read through it and write your answers in 120 pages long sized unruled notebook, which will be your science biology classwork. Thank you children.